So we'll just in turn introduce ourselves.
And I'm Omar Barbour from Black Panther Party and also from the National Alumni Association of the Black Panther Party.
I'm Ted Wilkinson. I'm currently living in Northwood, New Hampshire. I was in SDS many years ago, was a Panther ally. I lived in Berkeley in 68, 69, and then in San Francisco in the 1970s. I was circulation manager for the Black Community newspaper in San Francisco. Helped out when the FBI had blown up one of the printing presses that the Panther did. Was printed. Did what I could to get the paper out there. It was actually gratifying to see mention of the paper, and I just for show and tell for old time's sake. A couple of old papers. Recall that there was no internet back then, so the lefty press was very important stuff right there.
Right. As Jimmy mentioned, my name is Woullard Lett, and I'm from Manchester, New Hampshire, and currently affiliated with the Manchester NAACP. I guess probably what we'll do to get started is each of us in turn will reflect a little bit on the film and what sort of memories and thoughts it may have brought up, and then we'll open it up for discussion, with the group. So I'll start out, and when Fred Hampton was murdered, I was living in Chicago, and as they mentioned in the film, the Panther experience was different in different places. Like the Chicago out of the Midwest is very different from what was happening out on the West Coast, LA and Oakland, and even what was happening on the East Coast, New Haven and New York. And in fact, Chicago had a long history of community organizing and black nationalism, and the different groups sort of, I guess they kind of worked together more. Chicago at the time was the home or the national headquarters of the Nation of Islam. There was another nationalist group that considered itself cultural nationalists, which was the Institute of Positive Education and the Panther Party. Back in '68, I was about 13 years old, so I wasn't actively involved in any of the Panther activities, but I had an older brother who was, and who, would come and get me and say, hey man, help me sell these newspapers. But the thing that the film sort of just reaffirms for me is that the American experience of people of African descent has been the same over time, regardless of what you were doing. They were saying that, they attacked the Panthers because they were saying that they were standing up for, or they had guns. There was a guy in the NAACP in North Carolina back in the '60s. He wrote a book called Negroes with Guns.
Robert Williams.
Yeah, Robert Williams, And I think we were saying earlier when they were talking about what happened in Sacramento, because now, and all across the U.S., it's open carry laws, and but it's still open season.
Yeah, unless you're a felon. It's
still open season on people of African descent, whether you're a felon or not, And this video, it said, Martin Luther King was the great advocate of nonviolence. He met a violent end. The Panther Party were advocates of self-defense. They met a violent end. So it's it's sort of a reality check in the time of Donald Trump's great popularity.
Well said. Well, I like to thank Jimmy and Montana. I love his name. For inviting me here, and this is my third stop on a 3-leg trip. I was up at Pierce. I was in the Petersborough Theater, and since I've been here for a week after the primary, I feel the burn. I'm so glad that we have somebody that is not afraid to put the word socialism in the political lexicon. I think it's a change and represents a change. Jimmy, he was 13. I was 15 when I joined the party. From the New York chapter originally, Jamaica, Queens, in New York. I started off in the Black Student Union. I was a high school dropout. criminal in the worst sense of the word. Work with the mob in Queens. When you see Goodfellas and you hear about Henry Hill saying that Paulie controlled Idlewild Airport, well, I was one of the kids who also participated. Now, I lived in South of Zone, Queens, and we did a lot of things at the airport to make money. So my trajectory was twofold. I either was going to be a professional basketball player and come 6'3" and get me a contract and buy my mother a house, or I'll either be a Italian hustler. I never had to envision I would be a revolutionary. But I was able to meet a gentleman. His name was Edward Carpenter. Dr. Carpenter started a street academy known as Harlem Prep. And a white socialist teacher by the name of Elaine Avedon took me to a meeting to meet Dr. Carpenter. And he convinced me to come to Harlem Prep in Harlem. And when I did that, that changed my life. And I met the people in the Harlem branch of the Black Panther Party. I'm a Black Student Union leader in Queens. And I became a party and a ranking party member, and I moved up the ranks from that time on. When the Panther 21, and it's not covered in this truncated version, this is a independent lens, just to wet everybody's whistle so you go and either buy the DVD or watch the show. You see that the Panther 21 were all indicted for stuff like blowing up botanical gardens and the like. The longest trial in New York history, they were all acquitted. But what it did to the party is people like myself who were younger raised up to the leadership, because all the leadership was wiped out. So in order to keep the chapter going in New York, myself, Jamal Joseph, who was my contemporary, and folks like that, we had to rise to the occasion to become the leadership. And it was a daunting task at that age. In December 4th, 1969, I and a lot of my contemporaries started writing our last will and testament. When the word came in that Fred Hampton had been assassinated, then we knew the gig was up. And 4 days later, the Los Angeles chapter branch of the party was attacked in a 5-hour shootout. So as far as we're concerned, we made no plans going forward. I didn't expect to live to be 25 years old. I didn't expect to have 2 kids. My children now are 42 and 43 respectively. I have 6 grandkids, 1 great-grand, 5-year-old. But it was a daunting situation. So this is not something to romanticize the party. These events did happen. I was involved in a shootout at one point. A friend of mine's best friend, who just passed early this year, was shot in Jamaica, Queens in a shootout. And he survived that, but he got sick later on in his years and passed away. But it's a bittersweet existence because on the one hand, I think we made a very good impact socially in this country. I think the fact that people as so-called militants as we were or projected, the fact that we coined terms like power to the people, all power to the people. As Chairman Bobby said, we don't hate people because of the color of their skin, we hate oppression. We were Marxists. I'm a Marxist to this day. I learned my socialism the hard way in Bitter Street struggle. Some of my teachers were white teachers who actually introduced the concept of socialism. One time, I tell this story at a time, one of the teachers, I was talking about my father being unemployed, and she said, well, your father's a lumpen proletariat. And I took offense to that. I said, you call my father a name? I had no idea what a lumpen proletariat was. I thought she was being kind of trite. But it was a good education. By joining the party, I had some understanding about this understanding of the social system, capitalism versus socialism versus. So there was an educational component. All of us went to a rigorous training in the Black Panther Party. I ended up teaching a lot of my fellow Panthers how to read and write, because there were a lot of people who were illiterate. The school system that's failing people today failed us at that time. But it was a sense of camaraderie. It was a sense of each one teach one and each one be for one. And until this very day, when we started the Alumni Association, simply because we felt that if people from Yale or Harvard or Pierce can have alumni associations, their alma mater, we're Black Panthers, that's our alma mater, let's get together and amalgamate ourselves in our later years as well to be able to carry on some of that legacy, some of that unfinished 10-point program. So it's this film, in our opinion, is probably the best film on the party today to kind of set the record straight. But in no way is it definitive. There's a whole lot that doesn't get. But the Alumni Association entered into a memorandum of agreement with Stanley Nelson to work as advisors to him on this film, because we didn't think he was that well informed. And as it turns out, he was not that well informed. And because of our association, he's much more well informed. His original title for this particular movie was Seize the Time, which didn't sit well with Bobby Seale. He thought it was exploiting that term that he coined, and wrote a very great book, I think the most definitive book on the Panther, this Seize the Time. So as things evolved, and people like Bill Calhoun and other rank and file members of the party who were part of the Alumni Association, some who did not want to participate in this movie, but as we talked it out and said what the value of it, got people to really become part. The film is better for that reason, and the title became From Seize the Time to Vanguard of the Revolution. And there's some other aspects in here because of our engagement with the filmmaker that we think we're better off. So we support this movie. We think it's very informative, but we think that the real people that have to tell this story, it has to be former Panthers before we leave this earth, and can bring out some of the backstories to really show what we were all about and what our objectives were.
Thank you, Omar. I'm glad that you survived. I'm glad that you did survive. I know I survived mostly because of white privilege. I talked a lot of shit back then. It was mostly talk. I was never an advocate of violence. Quite to the contrary. I was making the argument both within SDS just before the Weathermen split, and then later on in the Bay Area with a number of groups, including the Panthers. No, you don't want to pick up the gun because that's just going to give them an excuse to come and kill you. But I completely understood armed self-defense. First Panther rally I ever went to was December of 1968. It was either the south side of Berkeley or North Oakland, a big parking lot of a co-op food store. And I completely got it. The 10-point program is as relevant today as it was then. I was surprised. I grew up on the East Coast, dropped out of college, and went out to joined the revolution. My older sister was a student at Cal Berkeley at the time, so I had a place to stay, and I got plugged into what was happening in the Bay Area back then. I was really impressed with the clarity of the Panthers' analysis of what was going on. Yeah, they were Marxist, are Marxist, and keenly aware of the imperialism. I mean, you recall that the Vietnam War was raging back then. There was a huge foreign war going on. There was the draft that was happening at the time. There had been riots all over the country. So things were really cooking. But I was very much taken with armed self-defense, with people taking care of themselves. I had studied some Chinese culture, so-called Red China, as we called it back then. And I was impressed with the fact that at least the Chinese dared to stand on their own 2 feet to tell the European dominant culture, no, we don't want you, we'll take care of ourselves, we'll feed ourselves. Well, I had a romantic notion about that, as I'm sure I had a romantic notion about revolution too. But it was really, really real. And I worked to help with the Panther Party, the newspaper, to get it circulated. I also volunteered for several years in the Free Breakfast for Children program, which was wonderful. And there was a free health clinic, and then there was a second free health clinic. This was in San Francisco at the time. The breakfast program that I worked on was run out of Sacred Heart Catholic Church on Fillmore Street, right between Oak and Fell Street. I knew most of the kids in the neighborhood. So many good things were happening. One observation is that I cannot possibly overemphasize, these guys can't, the film can't, how aggressive the police assault was on everybody, everywhere. I mean, hell, the FBI came and harassed my parents, and there were a couple of white folks living in Groton, Massachusetts. What the hell are the FBI doing there? Because they were after me, because actually one of the things mentioned in one of my some of the FBI records that I got from a Freedom of Information Act suit was that Wilkinson, Wilkinson is known to consort with Negroes. That's what they said, and that's all it took. They did not trust me. I was never asked to inform. I wouldn't at anybody, but they didn't know what the hell to make of me. Last thing I'll say right now is that those are hopeful times back then. There was a sense that we, the people, could make a change. We were fighting to stop the war in Vietnam, and maybe that sort of worked. After a while, we were fighting to bring down President Richard Nixon, and maybe that sort of worked. But it distresses me to say that one thing that has not changed is police violence against black people in this country. It is raging unabated. I mean, I remember talking passionately all my bullshit since 50 years ago. We got to stop the killing. Well, the killing hasn't stopped, and the only thing that's changed of significance, well, besides the Vietnam War is over, is that nowadays people have cell phones. And so all of a sudden, a whole lot of us in the European community are having this huge wake-up moment. Oh my God, the cops have been lying all along. They're still lying. And look all around the nation right now how many hot prosecutions there are and how many fumbling attempts there are to hold police accountable for this endless murder. So God bless the Black Lives Matter movement. To me, that's sort of another incarnation of the Black Panther Party.
Okay, well, let's, is there anyone else here who'd like to share their reflection or actually ask the question? Yes, sir.
Ma'am.
Ma'am, sir.
Right from.
Okay.
But I want to say thank you three for being here. It's an honor
Thank you for coming.
to be in your presence. I mean, I wouldn't be able to sit right here if it wasn't for the work that you all did.
Mm-hmm.
But my question is really to the Black Lives Matter movement. Do you feel as though all the work that the Panthers did and that you guys did kind of has been lessened and erased because Black Lives Matter is going through the same situation of constant discrediting in the media? You know, one black person does one thing and they say Black Lives Matter, like, oh, that was a Black Lives Matter, you know, spokesperson. Look at that, they're going open season on the cops. Do you feel as though that it's lessening the legacy of black empowerment and the Black Panther movement?
Well, in fact, I think we may have failed the Black Lives Matter movement by not being able to sustain a movement that would lead into that. But I work very close with the various, the movement for Black Lives. Black Lives Matter is just one part of that movement for Black Lives. And I'm always told to make that distinction by people in Black Lives Matter.
Oh yeah, I know.
Yeah, right, so the audience will know. But the response to the Wantham murder of Trayvon Martin and people like that, I think what spurred the movement in large part, it's been really germinating for a long time among this, what's known as the hip hop generation. And so I see that the challenges this generation face is similar challenge we face. And what I counsel a lot of the Black Lives Matter is don't be reactionary. Don't react to situations, respond to them. If there's a lesson that we learn, but it's also the hubris of being young. You're gonna make some mistakes to learn.
Don't encourage anything.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the thing is, a lot of people come to this because they are enraged by they see their contemporaries been shot down and what the police do. I mean, if you go back and look at in New York City, this stop and frisk law. Well, just for you who are historians, go back and read the Nation magazine article that James Baldwin wrote in 1964 called A Dispatch from Occupied Territory, where he talks about stop and frisk and no knock existed in New York back in that time. So stop and frisk didn't just start in the 2010, 12. It's been in existence all the time. And look as the judge declared stop and frisk as totally unconstitutional against everybody. How can you stop people walking down the street and just harass them, which is what it was? And why was it only against black and brown youth? So I think your point is well taken. This has been a continuous fight for the people, the descendants of enslaved Africans still trying to find equality in America. It's one of the vexing questions we have to face in this country, and how we find that. And so, yeah, the Panthers have always been portrayed as white haters, and that's something I'm appalled at all the time, because the people who really gave my education was whites, and they were people who saw me as equal, and that's something. The party had to, one thing that Dr. King said, and I study history a lot because I think that's key to understanding some of our contemporary situations. when Dr. King gave a speech at the 11th annual meeting of the SCLC, the SCLC was founded in 1967, a year before he died. He was having a change. That's when he made his speech at the Riverside Church about the war. And I think that's where he really became a real enemy of Hoover at that time. Yeah. He made a speech at the 11th annual meeting, and it's just entitled, "Where do we go from here?" And Claiborne Carson is a curator for Dr. King's papers at Stanford, so anyone want to research that. But he said the first thing that the SCL had to do in order to get started is not to mount the boycott in Montgomery, Alabama when Rosa Parks it down. The first thing he had to do is get black people, Negroes in terms used, to straighten off their back, to get out of being cowed, to being beaten down. The psychological thing of being living in a segregated society where you were second as a second-class citizen, you accepted your oppression. And that we had to get people to understand you have a right to boycott. You can stand up and try to go and get your register. You have a right to do that. So the fear factor. And when you look at what Hoover did, by one, stop the rise of a black messiah or disrupt, to stop black people from being able to participate in this society fully. Today it still goes on. And the apparatus check for that is the police departments in urban ghettos for the most part. So in Ferguson, I attended Ferguson with Stanley Nelson. We went to Ferguson to show the film. There was more cops than there were people. They thought we were coming there to start, and I'm Black Panther. They want to give me a personal escort. I said, I don't need a personal escort. In fact, there was a group who's part of the Black Lives Matter in St. Louis known as Organization for Black Struggle, and they've been around for some time. And they've been accommodating people who came to town to demonstrate in response to Michael Brown's killing, and they housed people, they found food. It's a great organization. But at the end, I stayed an extra night with these people. I just wanted to see where Mike Brown was killed, where they had the demonstration. And Ferguson is a microcosm to Concord. This is a small little town. This little street that Michael Brown is a 2-lane street. So in the media, you get it thrown out of proportion. Florissant Avenue is not a main thoroughfare. It's less than Main Street here. So you get this impression, this big city and all these demonstrations. It's a very tight little community. But the police there and the city government in a 21,000 population city, of which 14,000 people are black, 7,000 white. 10,000 citizens in that town are either under some type of warrant, some type of program they have to pay tax. So how do you have half your population, criminalized? Where's the equality in that?
Trying to ring you in a little bit.
Yeah, where is it? Right? You know, and so yeah, Black Lives Matter is important. You will make mistakes, and I think each generation must. But I think that the people are on the right trajectory, and anything we can do as elders to bring something to them to help them, we're there for you. Absolutely. Keep on keeping on.
Was there any comment from you, Ted? You don't have to, but I'm just wondering.
No, I just want to throw a little thought out there. The Stand Your Ground law that are sweeping the nation. They are murderous in their intent. They're based on deep implied bias, which is to say any police officer, and now in any state that has a Stand Your Ground law, the threshold for killing somebody is that you're scared of. Really? Is that all? And if you are of the European community and you have been taught all of your life that you're good and white is good and European is good and black is bad and scary, all of a sudden you're going to assume that you're going to be scared of black people. And that's what happens. It happens with cops, it happens with civilians. That's another thing that hasn't changed. They've actually just codified that into law.
Okay. Here and then here. Excuse me, before you start, was there a hand over? You? Okay, you're 3.
Us 3?
You're number 3.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I was like this gentleman, I grew up in Berkeley, California. And I, first of all, want to sincerely thank you and the organization because we were a struggling family. I look Caucasian. Most of us are Caucasian, but I also am Cheyenne. And my family felt very strong, my parents felt very strongly in making me aware of what was going on. And I was a little bit younger so I wasn't able to get really involved, but we would go to the gatherings like you were speaking of in the parking lot and what have you. And my parents supported it so much and volunteered and what have you. And we had cops at the door, and to the point where my dad, we had to leave. He lost his job and we had to move out because we were targeted. And it's very hard for me to see what's going on today and to go back and see what was happening in front of me. I had a good friend who was African American, and he can't walk. And it was a result of the brutality by the Oakland police for nothing. I mean, I was firsthand, I saw a lot of this. It's really hard for me to accept it because of seeing what was on the television, happening in the South and going, it can't happen here. Yeah, right. And it was happening. Yeah. And to see everything that's happening now, and I gotta tell you, I'm curious if you're optimistic. I mean, given everything that you have been through, because my optimism is starting to get really shot. I mean, I have an internal turmoil continually going on, I cannot believe that my generation, let this country down. I mean, what happened to us? We would hit the streets. I do believe that we had some change. I do believe that we got the Vietnam War out of the Vietnam War. I do believe that we got Nixon out.
He got himself out.
Well, yeah. I mean, what happened to the minorities? I mean, but who introduced him to?
Well, let me say this to you. We have to believe in humanity, and
I'm trying.
But I gotta believe that we as a species can overcome. I really do. I believe that. Montana told me from an eternal optimist. I am. I believe that our humanity can prevail. And I think even conversation like we was discussing the radio station this morning, I want to talk to the people who support Donald Trump. I feel their anger. They're misplacing their anger and their frustrations, right? So they may think black people are the cause, or Hispanic people, or Muslims are the cause, instead of the people who have gained this country. That's why I think the narrative that Bernie Sanders is talking about is so important to the political lexicon. So I'm optimistic that we can prevail. I really am. And I would hope that you can also find that optimism.
I vote all the time. Yeah. I'm very involved in the political scene, but
thank you.
Even that,
is.
Well,
we'll talk afterwards. I'll see if I can convince you.
Well, no, I mean, seriously, what can I do now? Aside from voting, aside from being active and getting the vote out and what have you, what can I do?
You guys can get together as soon as we get out. Dr. King said, finite disappointments, infinite hope. Yes, sir.
This is more of a question. I happened to watch the rest of the film last night after I listened to William and Brenda present. Right. And I guess my question is really like, what happened?
To the party?
Yeah, because there's a good movement, and I think what you're referring to about being younger and taking over was when, if you didn't see the film last night, when there was a massive arrest, which I was shocked. I was pretty young, knowing about the Black Panthers. I had no idea it was across the country. And everybody got arrested. They had $100,000 bail back then. People were there for years before they even go to court. Who's got $100,000 today to get out? White people even. Okay, and what happened? It's almost like it had a real good thing. We all want to belong.
Is that a question?
That's a question. What happened? Because now we get all these gangs. Because why? I work with gangs. They want to belong.
Okay.
So what happened?
Well, I think that the breakfast program, even though it became institutionalized in the sense of aid to family with dependent children and stuff like that, we didn't really make the economic change that we should have made. That really was it. And in particular, I think if there was 245 COINTEL activities out of 290 against the Panthers, that
Right.
kind of explained.
That's what
there was no way
Oh,
to
again, I'm sorry,
divide
200 what?
45 of the different activities that was committed under COINTELPRO. Almost 300, almost 250 was committed exclusively against the Black Panther Party,
Yeah.
including the murder of Fred Hampton.
Yes,
So
okay.
the party
It just
did-
broke
yeah,
it.
yeah, just
Yeah,
broke the
it
back.
just
They broke it.
Yeah, but I think the movement itself overall didn't make the kind of institutional changes. For instance, in '66, the black elected officials were maybe a handful. Now we have thousands, but the conditions, even though there's more black political representation, it never translated into really major institutional and systemic change.
Right.
I think that's why I was saying to the young lady about us failing them. We didn't really make the change we needed to in the change. We may have got Nixon out, he got himself out, but we really make the institutional changes I think is still necessary, and I think that's still the fight today.
Okay.
To make those institutional
And how
changes.
do?
I'll say that,
Yeah, how do.
yeah, and I'll say that, when you say what happened, COINTELPRO is what happened. And as you mentioned, you know, some of what's happening with the Black Lives Matter movement and how it's being characterized in the press. That same kind of, you know, institutional onslaught to any kind of objection or resistance. Did you want to say anything in response to the question, Ted? What happened?
Well, that was it. I mean, Freddie Hampton and Mark Clark and a bunch of Carter and John Huggins, and I mean, Geronimo Pratt was in prison for 27 years for a murder that the FBI knew goddamn well he didn't commit because they had him on their own illegal surveillance tape in Oakland, California, on the weekend that they claimed that he had murdered these white people on a tennis court in Long Beach, and they let him rot for 27 years. It was not so long ago that he got out, and there are other Panthers who are still in prison.
Wow.
Some 20.
Still.
20 of them.
Yeah, 23.
So that's what happened.
That's what happened. Okay. Yes, sir.
Well, the Panthers is a big subject.
It's a what?
But in your personal
big subject.
experience, would you, there's some things that maybe you thought were mistakes and should be left in the past. What would you most like to see brought into the current time? Things that were done right.
I think we need to be more connected to the people. I think at one point the party became sort of isolated from the people itself. Notwithstanding COINTELPRO, the disruption of stuff, I think that the arrogance also permeated, and it kept us from really making the connection and bringing people along. I think a lot of us did think, such as the BLA, that there was going to be an armed revolution, and that just didn't materialize.
And the BLA is Black Liberation
Yeah,
Army
it's
groups
outgrowth.
that came after
Yeah.
the
Black Panther
That's
Party.
sort of what Stokely Carmichael was saying, that
Yeah, well, he
Yeah,
became
yes,
a Pan-Africanist, which is a total different stuff. He wanted to make
Right.
more allegiance to Africa, and maybe blacks maybe start making moves like that. I still think that was also the wrong strategic approach as well. Although I
yeah,
respect
you don't
it.
have a leadership per se.
Mhm.
There's no celebrities.
No, I understand.
You're like the Viet Cong.
Mhm.
You know, they got one guy on top, but it's just a bunch of fighters.
Yeah,
You know, and the media, I think, is, at least in his opinion,
Yeah.
was the enemy.
yeah.
These guys sort of became rock stars,
Mhm.
and, you know, whereas,
That's why we want to. That's why we want to tell the story from a rank and file perspective,
Yeah.
as opposed to
Yeah.
all these so-called
Exactly.
main people. that-
Celebrities.
I mean, that's your
Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
hear,
Sounds like it is.
yeah, Ted, did you have a comment regarding that?
Well, there was a war going on at the time, and the Panther Party started in 1966, and the war against them escalated and escalated and escalated. And I don't know of any group in human history that has been able to withstand that kind of an onslaught and still be able to keep true to what their original founding principles might have been. I'd love to see everybody, especially my fellow Europeans, come up to speed on the 10-point program. It speaks directly to us all today.
I would say the one thing that we would want to preserve from Panther era, I remember, you know, in Chicago, I wasn't, within the community of African descent, there is different political persuasions, and the Panthers, they define themselves as revolutionary nationalists. They say, oh yeah, we're black nationalists, but we're revolutionary nationalists. You know, and then there are these people who call themselves cultural nationalists. And the difference is that, and the thing that I think we want to take from the Panther experience is the little clip that they did on Fred Hampton, where he was doing the analysis and saying, hey, we got to work this thing out together. I think that was really important, you know. There was a hand in the back, I think.
Well, I
Yes.
just had kind of a quick comment because I think we're all kind of about the same age, but I think in reality, the vast majority of white people in America grows up in white communities. And I grew up in the middle of Idaho, and I can remember at 13, and I know my husband who grew up in the middle of New Hampshire is the same kind of person as we just thought the Black Panthers were the coolest things in the world, right?
Yeah.
Because they looked so great, we'd never seen that before. And I think that's a really fascinating thing that we all have to remember is that the graphics, as they say, the optics now of the Black Panthers were so exciting and romantic for everybody who was open to that, right?
To that.
And I think that's something that young people have no sense of now. That, you know, we lived in these worlds where our parents say, oh, forget about, you know, Watergate's going to not, you know, they like Nixon, they, you know, they weren't necessarily active racists, you know, from the point of view of, you know, but they thought that things were out of control, you know. And so I think that's the interesting thing that I think we all have to remember, is that we were really a segregated society.
Yes, and still are.
Then and
Right,
now.
right,
Still are.
exactly.
Yeah.
But, you know, I have to explain to my children that Black people weren't on TV.
Right.
You know, there wasn't things like, but I have an actual question though about sort of the last scene where they show the police, the black policeman basically saying this was, you know, this
Chicago,
was,
yeah.
this was, how much was that at that time where, I mean, it was such a minority of black police officers. But now it's, I mean, it's interesting how now, how there's so much greater representation of minorities in police
Right.
departments, but they're still not talking separately or louder about police brutality. And I think that's interesting.
I think because the PBA controls the police department
Right,
in this country.
right, exactly.
Anytime the PBA can
The
have its
police
membership,
benevolent
association.
The union.
Yeah, can have to turn their back on the chief executive officer of this town, the mayor. I think you pretty much clear who really controls. This young Asian cop who just got convicted in New York.
Right.
We say police need better training.
Right.
Well, his first reaction after shooting this kid was to call his PBA representative
Right.
before he called for aid. That's training.
Right.
That's training.
Right.
He was trained,
Yeah.
very well trained.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
All right? He didn't follow, but his humanity should have been, I've done this, let me make sure this person's right, get
Yeah.
911, and then I can call my PBA.
Right.
He did the reverse.
Right.
So I think, but the other thing is, him and his partners are rookies. You don't put rookies into situations like that. You have to have a seasoned veteran to go in there in any kind of situation like that. So I think that also shows what the police departments have become, not only become militarized, I think how they make their decision, who runs them, who dictates to them, are not the civilian authority. I think they have capitulated on their jobs.
But let me say though that you referenced the two Chicago cops.
Yeah.
Now Howard Sappho and Renault Robinson, and those two guys formed an organization. The thing is that, you know, there are like, there's a German word called Zeitgeist, where there's like a collective groupthink kind of thing, and people were, you know, like in the street, they were active, they were looking for change, and so Renault Robinson and Howard Sappho formed an organization within the police, Chicago Police Department, called the Afro-Americans Patrolmen's League. Yeah, so they had like a caucus, you know, in Chicago, partly in response to the fact that that they were subject to being treated, you know, racist behavior, experiencing racist behavior
Within the
themselves
department.
within the department. So so that's part of the reason why they were speaking out, and they were actually featured here. I was surprised that they only identified them as the Chicago Police Department and not as the African American Patrolmen's League. Yeah. Other questions, comment? Yes, ma'am. Did you want?
No, it's just Montana's mother.
Throw me under the bus and I still have some.
No, get up.
Thank you very much for continuing the struggle,
Thank you.
because it is a struggle.
Mm.
I didn't have a question, but what I would ask, and it was raised partially tonight,
Mm.
what's the narrative for the generation going forward?
Solidarity.
Solidarity?
Yeah, I was telling a story about Ferguson. I recommend to this group in Ferguson that they make a mount a class action lawsuit against the city of Ferguson. And reason why, as a result of their settlement with the Department of Justice, Ferguson will face $1 million shortfall in their budget. That criminalization, 10,000 people have been criminalizing for 10 years. That's been making up the difference between the shortfall and the budget. Right? As far as I'm concerned, they've been running a racketeering operation. RICO. Go after them with a RICO charge. I'm trying to convince Cheryl Eiffel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to take that action. It would be a landmark decision making. And I think all the predicate acts of what you need under RICO are there. They're in the agreement with the Department of Justice. So this new Department of Justice lawsuit, I think, will be very revealing, right? But why they decided not to go through with the consent agreement? Because they said they were losing money. They don't want to lose any more money. You got to criminalize some more people.
Right, they can afford it.
Right. But what I'm telling the Black Lives Matter, the organization Black, is that what they need to do, and this is to answer your question in particular, is to get 4 lead plaintiffs, and they need, and who those plaintiffs are taxpayers. You get 2 white taxpayers and 2 black taxpayers. And they said, well, why we need these white people? I said, because they are taxpayers. You can't look at them, you gotta look at them as a class. The class action of people who have a similarly affected by this action, they are taxpayers. If they can't fill this hole in their budget, they're gonna raise taxes. Therefore, anyone who's a taxpayer in Ferguson is gonna be against them raising their taxes. So you need plaintiffs. So overcome this thing about you have to be a black thing. This affects everybody, and you need to be going to all you need is 2 white citizens and say, look, you know, you're gonna have your taxes raised because of what they've been doing by keeping us criminalized. They was the what? Let's go. So you gotta look past this stuff and see strategy and tactics. We saw it with the Peace and Freedom Party and made allegiance like that. They gotta do the same. And I understand racism. See, I understand because you face what my son just asked me. He said, "What's institutional racism? You mean the building's racist?" I said, "No, it's how it's run, how things run. It's not. Institution don't mean building. It means how things are structured. And so you got to break down that structure. So you need to make rapprochement to the white folks in Ferguson and say, look, we have a commonality of interest in what's going on here. Let's make allegiance so we can overcome this situation." Now, after the result of this latest lawsuit, Montego Simmons, who runs, he says, "Brother, you're right. How do we do that?" So now the NAACP is going to be talking to them about coming in as a friend of the courts, an amicus brief along those particular lines. So that's how you do. You make allegiance with people. You see the commonality of interest we all have, and I think we all have a commonality of interest because we're on this planet that is in serious problems. And we all affected by climate change. We all affected what's going on with our water. That's a commonality interest we have international as Americans. And I think that's what we make rapprochement. From that aspect, we gotta live on this planet together. And we gotta make sure that what's going on with this planet is gonna allow our kids, whether it be black, brown, white, to continue into the future. So that's something we have a commonality interest we all have to make sure we fight this global warming and the greenhouse gases emissions that's going on in this country.
We all have 24 hours in a day, we all breathe the same air, and we all need water to support.
That's right.
To survive.
We put our pants on and our dresses on the same way. Absolutely.
Yes, sir.
I'm a little concerned when you mention your identification with the Marxist people, and also my limited understanding of the Black Panther Party was that it was for the advancement of colored people, rather than a revolutionary approach. And when you mention Marxism, that indicates to me that you're overlooking the oppression of people in Tibet, for example, by the Chinese, and people of faith by Marxist governments and things like that. How can you reconcile these issues with how the Black Panther Party or your associates or your colleagues or other organizations that are affiliated, how can you reconcile those issues with how you people expect America to consider your causes when revolutionary is such a heated term.
Yeah, it is. Well, one, we don't refer to ourselves as colored people anymore. That's
Right.
the first thing. So, you know, a black or African American is more conducive to us than colored people. We think that was something imposed upon us as part of getting out of that bag. Now, as a Marxist, what I'm talking about, I think there's the inherent problems in capitalism, and I'll be willing to have that debate with anybody. I guarantee that what's going on in China or Russia and other totalitarian states, I'm not supportive of that anyway because it's a violation of human rights. But I think that you've got to have a system where each, according to his ability, is given something according to their needs. And I think that's a basic premise of a socialist ideology, and I think you gotta have that. So I would want you to give based on your ability and you receive according to your need. And I think you can agree with that, wouldn't you?
Somewhat.
Well, somewhat is all I need for
Yeah.
somewhat. That's the dialogue that I want to have with, like I say, the term, because we can find commonality of interest about what it is. So the terms can be a little misleading. I think there's a natural tendency in America because of the belittling of the word communism has been anti-American. So it has been something contrary to America's interests. I think that the people who ran this country did that. I think when the New Deal came along, the powers that be hated Franklin D. Roosevelt because he was making a societal change, making people who had all the money get back, and I think they made a decision at that time not to have a New Deal. And as we saw in 2008, we have to have a New Deal. This country almost went back into depression.
Right.
So I still think that America has a class system.
Right.
I still think there's a ruling class.
Right.
So I think those terms, those Marxist terms, although they may not be in the lexicon, still exist. And so it just needs to be made clear, that's all.
Well, how do you find and reconcile your brothers that are of faith and
I'm of
trying?
faith. I'm a Christian.
Yes, I see.
I'm a Christian. Yes,
I see.
I am of faith.
Marxism,
But I can still be a Marxist.
Right.
Marxism is an economic structure.
In theory.
The counter about capitalism is, it's not about whether or not a society is democratic, it's not about, it's about economics.
Yes.
And so let's look at what's happening under capitalism. Let's see, how about healthcare for profit? Gee, how's that working out now? How about policing for profit? How's that? How about prisons for profit? Yeah, and you go right down the line and you realize how destructive this thing called capitalism that we've all been encouraged to accept without question is really, really
Yes, but what
negative.
about Marxist exploitation?
What about it?
Well, let me, excuse me, sir, let me say this, and I think actually Ted and Omar were making an attempt to say that there are always strengths and weaknesses.
Right.
There is Marxist exploitation, there's also capitalist exploitation. In fact, I was saying earlier about, you know, as I was coming up in Chicago back during the late 60s, the group in the community that I ran with, they were anti-Marxist. They were the black, they were called by the Panther Party, the narrow-minded nationalists.
Right.
And actually, but what happened though was that when we looked at on the African continent and the liberation struggles on the African continent, all over the continent, whether you're talking about South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, wherever you look, those people were Marxists. You know, because of, you know, and the people that they were struggling against, the imperialists, were capitalists. So, you know, I mean, it's not, here in America, there is just like we say, oh, in Russia and China, they have this propaganda about their system is good. In America, they got propaganda, and it says this system is good, and everything is all good here, and everything else is all bad. So what we have to do, I think, and what needs to happen is actually take a, what do you call it, sober, realistic look at what's going on. That Marxism has its strengths and weaknesses, so does capitalism. Yes, sir.
Quick comment.
Wait, before you go, is there anybody else? Because it's your second turn.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a study by Princeton recently that indicates that we do not live in a democracy.
There was a study by
Princeton,
Princeton, yes.
we live in an oligarchy.
Okay,
And I would submit that that's the same system that they have in Russia,
okay,
and probably the same system that they have in China.
okay, thank you.
Kleptocracy.
Okay. Any other reflections, questions?
I was going to ask,
Yes.
if the 10 points, I think you
Yes.
see 3 or 4 in
Right.
the movie, are they in the paper? Are they easily listed?
Yes, actually, I brought several Panther papers in, and I think Omar may have the one that has the best explication of the 10-point program. So as soon as he comes back with his newspaper, we can read it right out to you. But yes, it does start out with we want freedom, we want housing, decent housing, we want food, we want an end to police oppression, and it gets down, and so the 10th point is kind of all of them together. We demand peace and food and housing. Omar, question?
Okay.
Question about the 10-point program.
You say it's in the
See your
paper.
paper for me.
I think I'm gonna head out, I'm right in front of that. Yeah.
And and interestingly enough, the Nation of Islam, another black nationalist group, had a similar 10-point program.
That's the last page.
I thought it was,
There you
that
go.
is right.
Okay, what is?
Can you do a quick readout? Let the folks know what it is.
I do what
I couldn't see that in my younger days.
Right.
we want freedom. We want the ability to determine the destiny of our black community. We want decent housing fit for the shelter of human beings. We want an end to the robbery by capitalism of the black community. And that was changed from, we want to end the robbery by white men or the white communities to capitalists. We want, I said, decent housing. We want education for our people that exposes the true nature, decades of American society, and we think that's important. History of slavery and the like. We want education that teaches us our true history and our role in the present day society. We want all black men to be exempt from military services. We want an end to immediate end to police brutality and murder of black people. That was number 7 of this 10-point program. It became like what defined the party as a whole. But that was only number 7 of a 10-point program. We want freedom for all black men held in federal, state, county, and city prisons and jails. We want all black people who brought to trial to be tried by in court by a jury of their peers. And 10 is sort of a summary. We want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. And as our major political objective, a United States supervised plebiscite to be held throughout the black colony in America, which only black colonial subjects will be allowed to participate for the purpose of determining the will of black people as to their national destiny.
That's the 10-point, yeah.
And one thing that's changed is that there are even more black men in prison right now per capita than there were then.
Right.
Years ago. It's worse now than it was then in terms of mass incarceration.
Yeah.
Isn't there more people in prison in the United States?
Than any industrial world. Yeah. And I think the war on drugs drove that.
Yeah.
The so-called war on drugs
Right.
under Reagan, and you know.
And the omnibus bill.
Yeah, well, you know, the war on drugs apparently didn't get to the white youth now who are strung out on this heroin nationally, and these prescription drinking killers. You know, the one thing I was telling the fellas when we had dinner early, that I'm from New Jersey. I live in New Jersey, so Christie's my governor, and I was surprised he didn't do as well as he did since he moved from New Jersey to New Hampshire. Had his wife and his whole family. But the one thing he did do in Jersey, he passed these drug courts. He actually passed legislation, passed what he can get. But they're primarily in suburban counties. All right. So there's been black kids who've been fighting drug addiction and drug problems, and they've been doing it because they were inherent criminals, where white kids now looked at as that, you know, they need help, they're sick, this is a public health issue, you know, so even in him making this policy, it's still done along racial lines. You know, and so it's, you know, that's what I have to fight with as a citizen there, and I have to fight, you know, my battle, because all politics is local. Right. And so even in him doing something like that, look how it's done. But I, you know, I think it also shown that white youth are also feeling a disconnect in society as well. That we have to address that as well. Right. You know, so again, we have some major concerns.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question, not to turn this into like a book club type thing, but I think about like Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, yes, and how he talks about like the violation of the body. Like, how do you see that? And like, I mean, I feel like that book is so, like, to her point earlier, like inherently pessimistic, and like a huge warning, and just how he talks about how his son like doesn't see it that way. Like, he sees what's happening, but he doesn't have the same pessimism. And so I guess I'm not familiar with like what parts of the Panther Party would have really like reflected some of those same ideas that he continues.
Well, by way of background, one, his father is my colleague, he's a former Panther, so he's a Panther Cub.
Interesting. Yeah.
Part of his ideology is that. Two, he's supporting Bernie Sanders. He will be voting for him.
Yes, yeah, as a voter.
And his son will be voting for him, even though he disagreed with him on the issue of reparation. Right. Yeah. And I think that as a writer, he sees things a little bit different than I would see him, because he didn't come by way of reparations the way I come about it, and we came about it. We came about it in a struggle really to looking to do that as part of the affirmative action, these other measures that were designed to try to address the historical discrimination against people of enslaved, descendants of enslaved Africans, which now became, affirmative action became a buzzword for anything wrong, you're gonna make it right. So I think what happened to him was he did his particular story on reparations. He didn't start off doing that. When he went to Chicago in particular, and he found out about the Contractors League, where black people in Chicago were not able to get money to buy homes, mortgages. They were entered into relationship with realtors and paying these exorbitant fees. They rent to own it, and they never own their house. They miss one payment, they lose their house. So he came about this by his research. Because I've had debates with him about certain things, and it's his generation and how they perceive things. Now he is growing. I think you'll start seeing him having a better understanding about stuff. Like he's coming around to support Bernie Sanders, even though he disagreed with him. I think
very reluctantly, yeah.
Right. So I think you evolve. Again, when I say that when I counsel people in Black Lives Matter, the movement Black Lives, about not coming to this in a reactionary way, I'm trying to tell them, look, I understand that when you see one of your contemporaries shot down and treated in such a disdainful way like Michael Brown, I understand that. But understand there's something much deeper, so don't just take your anger at the police. Also take your anger out against the district attorneys or the prosecutors who fail to prosecute these people who make these false reports, as in the case of Eric Gardner, as in the cases of who actually lied about what happened to Eric Gardner. So therefore, as officially, their reports are official reports. There's a standard they have to meet. So they all lied because they didn't know the tape existed. So does the prosecutor not have a responsibility to take them up as well? So the systemic problem what we got to look at, don't look at just the cops as being cops. So don't think that, well, you had the gun and you were going to fight the cop. We were fighting a system. If you understand what was happening in Oakland at the time, the black people that lived in Oakland hailed from southern states for the most part. Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Texas. All the people that worked for the Oakland Police Department were recruited from Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas. So the animus was there. That's why Oakland was such a hotbed of racial animus between the police department because of how the police department was managed and ran. They brought those guys in there with their racist attitude to control black people, just as they had been in those southern states. So those are the things that people got to look at. How does these things come about? They come about through policy. To someone sitting somewhere making decisions, let's go down this road versus not go down this road. Ferguson didn't overnight come to be like it was. We had 10,000 people under arrest essentially, or under a warrant. Half your populations. How do you do that? How do you do that? Right? And someone is making a conscious decision to do that, and that's what's got to be challenged. So I'm less concerned about the police not coming up Mike Brown's body for 4 hours right opposite where his grandmother lived, and what the pain she must have to see her son laying out there. It's not necessarily the police who are employees of the city to say that. There's a city manager, there's a mayor, and there's council people. They couldn't step out there and say, look, I want to interfere in your investigation, but don't you think you should put a sheet on that body? It's just a matter of general respect. The fact that the whole system couldn't find itself to do that shows that the whole system is wrong. So I want to go at the system, not just the police. I don't want to make them the scapegoats.
Right.
The system. Who make the decision? The city manager is the primary suspect.
Right. So while we have to expect personal responsibility, we also have to require institutional accountability. Okay.
I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Other comments, questions? Well, you did a good job, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's go burn. Good talk, man. Good talk. Thanks everybody. I've had a great time while I've been here. Thanks for your